Welcome, members. This is the Subcommittee on Issues relating to the improvement of living conditions of the grassroots tenants. Let me inform members. Our term will last until mid-May. We will have another meeting in April, and that will be the end of this subcommittee. We have spoken to the administration. We would like to talk about the tenancy control of subdivided units in the April meeting. We will have some update information. You'll be informed. Today we're here to talk about the central and unified platform for transitional housing. We have the Undersecretary here. There are many views from members. They say that they would like to see this platform. A number of members in the past have raised this issue in this subcommittee. The administration has taken on board our views, and they have introduced a new approach to introduce this measure to provide a measure that is more convenient to applicants. We will now have the Undersecretary for Housing to take us through the paper. I will first go through this paper. This is the central and unified platform of the transitional housing. We talk about the promotion as well as a proposal to adjust the tenant ratio. We have identified land to construct 20,000 transitional housing units. 7,000 of them have been put into service. It's expected that in the next 2 years, there will be another 14,000 units coming on stream. When the units have been constructed, when we start population intake, we want to enhance our coordination. There is a one-stop thematic website to provide information. Apart from this website, we will introduce an additional measure to step up our publicity. There is a central common application form as well as a unified platform. It will make it easier for applicants to submit their applications, and those who have pressing housing needs will be housed sooner into these transitional housing. I will now go over the salient points in each part. Information counter of transitional housing starting in January this year. At Lok Fu, we have provided a temporary information counter. We have actually identified a better location to set up a permanent information counter. You'll find the information in Annex 2. We'll organize guided tours to transitional housing projects. In January, we have organized 3 such tours. In the second round, we will organize tours in April. The previous ones have been received quite well. I thank legislators and different parties for their help. There are other organizations that have organized similar tours that are similarly received well. So we'll continue with this measure. Apart from providing more information for those in need to know about transitional housing, we want the general public to know more about the projects as well. In the second half of this year, we will organize an open day. We'll do it with operating institutions or organizations. The open day is for those who are in housing need and the general public as well. On publicity, starting from February this year, we have started mailing promotional pamphlets to applicants who have been waiting for public housing for not less than 3 years. We've also made available these pamphlets at various locations that include the customer service counter of the Housing Authority, district social welfare offices, home affairs inquiry centers, and the 6 district service teams promoting the ordinance on tenancy control of SDUs, subdivided units. In relation to the Central Uniform Platform as well as the Central Common Application Form, we do this by 3 stages. In the first stage, that is in the near future, we will launch the Central Common Application Form. This is to dovetail the launch of the information website. Information of transitional housing will be uploaded. So prospective applicants will be made aware of the information they need before they make an application. We reckon that in the second quarter, we will launch the form. In the second stage, we will launch the unified platform. We think that in the fourth quarter, we will launch this platform. The merit of this platform is that applicants can submit their applications via this platform. They will be given an application number, and they'll be able to make inquiries of their applications online. They can find out the progress of the application and the result of the application. And at the third stage, we will introduce more functions, say for example, data collection and analysis. The data collected will enable the Housing Bureau to compile statistics. The information is also useful to operating organizations as well as applicants. About the second phase of the launch of the unified platform, information on success rate as well as vacancy rate are made available. This will help applicants make decisions. We've also enhanced communications with operating organizations. We hold regular meetings. The first one took place in early March. We'll continue to keep in touch with operating organizations on the design of the unified platform and the introduction of the Central Common Application Form. Lastly is the adjustment in ratio between Category A and Category B tenants. In each of the housing projects, 80% of the units are allocated to those who have been waiting for no less than 3 years, that is, waiting for public housing, and they are called Category A tenants, and 20% of them are for others, collectively called Category B tenants. Category B tenants are those who have a pressing housing need or are in urgent need for community support. It also covers those who have been waiting for public housing for less than 3 years but with imminent housing needs. Organizations may adjust the ratio between Cat A and Cat B tenants. At present, organizations will take into account the projects and the catering of units to housings. If there is an abundance of vacant units, they may make an application to adjust the ratio to increase the percentage of Cat B tenants. They have to submit a proposal to the assessment committee. If it is approved, they can change the tenant ratio and use it for recruitment of tenants. So far, for Pok Oi Kong Ha Wai Village and United Court at Tong Tau have had their ratios changed to 60-40 for Cat A and Cat B. The overall occupancy rate has been rising steadily subsequent to the adjustments. For your information, the latest occupancy rate for United Court has reached 68%. We have a number of transitional housing projects in the pipeline. We learn from experience that it takes time to house tenants. To give more flexibility for operating organizations to house Cat A and Cat B tenants, we suggest that before the project is completed, the organizations can seek approval from the assessment committee with justification to make adjustments. Once approved, the organizations can allocate the units on the basis of the adjusted ratio to speed up the recruitment of tenants. There is a concern that more units will be made available to Cat B tenants, but under our mechanism, units have to be allocated to Cat A tenants first. If there is surplus unit, and if there is a large number of Cat B applicants, then units can be allocated to Cat B tenants. This is to ensure that there won't be any waste of units because they've been left vacant. We'll continue to talk to operating organizations on the unified platform. We'll also talk to them about flexibly adjusting the ratio between Cat A and Cat B tenants. If they are to recruit tenants, they should start their publicity work and apply for adjustments in ratio as soon as possible. That's all for my presentation. Well, the unified platform is something that this subcommittee has been fought for quite some time. We'll see if there is any room for improvement. So far, 6 members have pressed the request to speak button. We have Lo Wai Kwok, Vincent Chang, Edward Lau, Starry Lee, Lo Meng Kwong, Dr. Wendy Hong, and myself.
First of all, I would like to say that the colleagues in government departments are following up on what we said. Last meeting, I was quite annoyed because for residents applying for transitional housing, it's not a shocking suggestion. It's very natural. If you have to have NGOs operate transitional housing, they have to contact those in need themselves. It is quite confusing, but I do praise the efforts, as we can see in Annex 4. The application process for this unified platform is quite reasonable. It's just like applying for public housing. You have 3 chances. But right now you're picking transitional housing operated by NGOs instead of government housing. If your application is not successful, you'll be assessed by the second priority organization. But I do have to criticize, why do you have to wait until Q4? Transitional housing is a great help for those living in undesirable conditions. So if you have this platform, you should roll it out as soon as possible. I don't think it's that complicated that would take 6 months to complete. If you can say you have difficulties, but I'm not going to listen to them, because you have to achieve this. You have to think of some way to resolve this. There's always some way to resolve this. Also, I have to praise the change with Cat A and Cat B tenants now that it's more flexible. Having waited 3 years, they don't really have to wait. Can they move? Would they have to move again? As you know, even if it's a move within a neighborhood, it's still quite cumbersome. Also, with the location of transitional housing projects, if it is in a remote area, it's going to cause trouble for people who have to go to work or go to school. So they may want to stay in their subdivided units instead. So if you can have more transitional housing projects to try to alleviate the problem, that is a good direction to take. As for what I want the government representative to say, if they can't be allocated public housing within 3 years, or if they have to stay there transitional housing for 3 years, it's going to be what is going to happen after that. Would you be able to allay their concerns? Thank you, Dr. Low. With the completion time of the platform, we will definitely try to roll it out as soon as possible. We do want to do so. If possible, we hope to roll it out by Q3. I won't go into the difficulties, but the most important thing for applicants is the central common application form. With this application form, they can mark their 3 preferences for transitional housing projects. Well, behind the scenes, we will talk to operating organizations to process the application with regard to the priority given. So the function itself is incorporated in the central common application form. But through the platform, we can expedite the processing of the application. When there are more Cat B tenants, they may stay there for longer. They may not be able to get allocated public housing units that soon. So we have offered some flexibility in that regard with certain projects. After the use period of this lot, if the operator or there is still no long-term development plans for the lot, we can extend the operator's use of this lot to let tenants stay there for a bit longer. We, in principle, do not object to extension of use of such lots. It would depend on the situation with housing needs, and will consider on a case-by-case basis. Mr. Lau Kwok Fan. Thank you, Chair. I do welcome the introduction of this central and unified platform and the adjustment with the ratio between Cat A and Cat B tenants. Housing is a problem concerned by all over Hong Kong. Before, they would have different organizations doing their own thing, but it is not up to expectation so far. So the government, now that they see the problem, they should make improvement as soon as possible. With regard to the ratio of Cat A to Cat B tenants, I think the adjustment is good because there should be more flexibility. For those waiting for public housing for 3 years, some of them may not have waited for 3 years, but they may have certain circumstances, family circumstances, that they would require help. Right now, society may not offer enough help for those people. So I think with this adjustment, the role of transitional housing can offer them help as well. And I think that is an appropriate adjustment. To enhance support for transitional housing and step up publicity, you have done quite a lot. Say promotional pamphlets, or in Housing Authority Customer Service Center, you have had information counters set up and some mailing pamphlets. Do you have any figures after you have implemented such measures to see which measures are more effective? Perhaps if you can do so, you can mail questionnaires to people in need or people applying for public housing, what they think about transitional housing, what their needs are, and what the arrangements are or they want. If you can collect their views, I think the measures would be more focused. All right, thank you, Mr. Lau. Thank you, Chair. I think that is a very good suggestion. In fact, with our publicity efforts to help residents or people learn more about transitional housing projects, we do not have any figures as of yet, but I've gone on a guided tour or tours before. I think I've heard positive feedback from those during the guided tours regarding the environment and the project itself. And there are people who would fill in applications right away. And so I think that is beneficial. We would consider to organize more guided tours in future, or perhaps open day. We can perhaps conduct surveys during such activities to monitor the effects of our publicity efforts and to see what members of the public or the prospective tenants think about the projects, we will enhance such work in future. Again, I hope you can roll out this platform as soon as possible. Thank you. Next, Ms. Darley. Chair, again, I welcome the introduction of this platform. We have been working in this subcommittee for almost a year. This is almost the end of the subcommittee, and we have achieved something, I would say. The urgency of housing projects should be dealt with the same efforts for public housing and transitional housing, because this also takes up resources of taxpayers. So we can develop transitional housing in tandem with public housing so that people living in SDUs in undesirable conditions can benefit from those. I have made a criticism many times. I think you are not as enthusiastic about transitional housing. Well, the first batch of transitional housing projects have been passed in LegCo. I think that is great news for those living in undesirable conditions. We do welcome this introduction of platform, but I do wonder if there are any KPIs or like how many people are going to be admitted to such transitional housing units. We had this operation to tackle STUs before, where we would arrange people to visit such transitional housing projects. We have to disseminate information specifically for them because they may not know about this platform until you tell them about it or until you are trying to tackle that problem. So I do want to know what your plans are. Are you going to wait for them to apply to the projects through the platform themselves, or are there any KPIs for them for publicity efforts? So I do understand that the cost may be higher, but it is a pressing problem. So I hope you can be as enthusiastic about transitional housing as other public housing projects. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Lee. I do understand that for light public housing and transitional housing projects, they do complement each other. For transitional housing projects, there are units that have been put into service. In the next 2 years, there are more units that are going to be completed and put into service in 2024 and 25. There will be the first batch of like public housing units. So they complement each other in timeline. Also, with the flexible adjustment to the ratio of Cat A to Cat B tenants, it would allow those living in undesirable conditions in SDUs, they can benefit from that. And I believe that is, again, a complementary measure. It proves that they are complementary. Also, with the publicity efforts and guided tours, we will continue to conduct such activities. With the open day, we hope that it is not just for SDU tenants. We hope that the general public can be more aware of the projects and perhaps raise awareness in general in terms of media reports, etc. We can enhance publicity through those and enhance the promotion of transitional housing projects. As for KPIs, we will monitor the usage of the platform and application figures of those applications submitted via the platform. We will also get in touch with operating organizations or SDU tenants or prospective tenants or applicants to see if the platform benefited them. We will definitely monitor such statistics. to determine the direction and to assess the effect of the platform. Of course, I have seen that the Bureau is working on that, but these are not KPIs exactly. You can think about that, because I think if you have KPIs, you can do something. We still have another meeting coming. I hope that you can give a more detailed reply then, because we are working together. We are working with the government to help SCU tenants, especially in children. If you don't have KPIs, you can't monitor the performance. This subcommittee is coming to an end then, but we still have to work on this, and we'll continue to monitor your performance. I hope that you can give us KPIs next meeting. Thank you.
講完。係
Next, Mr. Lam Man Kwong. I'm glad to hear from the administration that they have taken on board our views and they launched the platform for applications. As we've said, that for grassroots, it's difficult for them to access information. There are many different projects. Without a uniform platform and with an increasing number of projects, it will be much more difficult. So I'm glad to see that the government has heard us. Apart from this platform for application, will there be more assistance provided? Say, there will be more flexibility in the application for these projects. Of course, it will be best for these tenants to move from transitional housing to public housing, but there are still households that will have to move to a different location before they are allocated public housing. Can the central platform be incorporated with a function with pre-approval of public housing so that the tenants will know about the result and they will have an idea what is going to happen so that they will not be left to their own devices? In relation to the adjustments, I have some questions. The ratio of Cat A to Cat B, is it going to stay for a very long time? With the first batch of transitional, with the light public housing, the priority will be given to those who've been waiting for more than 3 years. And of course, for Cat A tenants, they will prefer light public housing. If there is a rigid ratio for projects in the new territories, and it's only afterwards when you apply for adjustments that it will slow down the processing of application and occupancy. So I do hope that there should be a more flexible ratio of transitional housing with the launch of light public housing. You just give priority to Cat A tenants. Now, you tell those living in appalling conditions in subdivided units, you tell them that they don't necessarily have to be Cat A tenants. They can be Cat B tenants. There are more choices. These subdivided units will be phased out because there is a better choice. People, of course, will go for the better choice. I hope that you will consider these points. I thank the member for their questions. For pre-approval function, that is in relation to the platform. Yes, we will consider that. Well, there is a priority given by the applicant. We monitor the number of vacant units. So yes, the pre-approval is something that we are able to do. We also encourage operating organizations to do it. But it takes manpower, so a balance has to be struck. So they will keep in view of the number of vacant units. In relation to the ratio of Cat A to Cat B tenants, whether we need an actual ratio. For locations that are quite accessible, say in the urban area, the ratio itself is not a problem because there will be a lot of applications. There is flexibility built in. This is to enable that some units will be allocated to Cat B, even with a high number of Cat A applicants, because they do have needs. Without the ratio, for some projects, perhaps there won't be any flats allocated to Cat B tenants. We aim to strike a balance. We want to build in as much flexibility as possible. We'll see whether 60 to 40 is a good ratio. We'll keep in view the situation and flexibly make adjustments. We do not rule out the possibility that when the conditions are right, we will accord priority to Cat A without setting a ratio. If that is the case, we may make adjustments. Next, Dr. Wendy Hong. Thank you. In order to enhance the occupancy rate of transitional housing, they have done a lot of work. They have set up the information counter. There is the central common application form and the launch of the unified platform. I do appreciate that. Recently, I have visited some transitional housing projects and I've also spoken to operating organizations. I have some questions. First, the HA customer service counter at Lok Fu. This is not permanent. Operating organizations welcome the approach. Well, there is the cash allowance trial scheme. The aim is to benefit those who have been waiting for 3 years, and that is exactly the criteria of Cat A. Their office is a perfect location to publicize this scheme. We visited this office, but it's not put to proper use. So we think that the cash allowance trial scheme should have an office similar to the Lok Fu information counter, so that prospective applicants for Cat A will get information they need. But in relation to the task force on transitional housing, they're most conversant with the project. They should be more involved. They can regularly visit the Lok Fu information counter. They can help to explain to the public about these projects, so they can play a part in publicity and promotion. Apart from the information counter, will the government consider producing TV programs on transitional housing? You need to cover many different ways, and the most effective one is a TV program. Some organizations told me that at the beginning of the year, the HA worked with the TV station on the production of TV series on public housing. Perhaps a similar project can be done on transitional housing projects, so that the latest information can be made available to the general public. The third question is about Cat B tenant applications. Well, the criteria itself is very clear for Cat A tenants, that is those that have been waiting for at least 3 years for public housing. It's easy for their applications to be processed. But what about Cat B? Who are they? There is no clear guideline. In some projects, there are social workers talking to these applicants, getting a better understanding of the household situation before deciding whether they're eligible or not. But it takes a very long time. Well, with light public housing, more transitional housing units will be allocated to Cat B. Well, you ask organizations to complete the application within 1 month, but these organizations told me that without a clear guideline, it's very difficult to meet this objective. You've used over $10 billion on this transitional housing project. You want to provide help to those in need as soon as possible, but without certainty, it's difficult for the organizations to gauge the situation. They reckon that there will be more applications coming from non-permanent residents. Should the projects be given priority to permanent residents? But what about non-permanent residents? The NGOs told me that they don't know how to deal with it. So will guidelines be provided for the processing of applications of Cat B tenants? I thank the member for the questions. In relation to the Office of the Cash Allowance Trial Scheme, there should be stepped up publicity and exploring different avenues, say for example TV programs, for better effect. I thank the member for their ideas, and we will consider them. Regarding the participation of Task Force on Transitional Housing in publicity and promotion is something that they have already been doing. The task force has rendered help in the guided tours and various other publicity efforts. Applications of Cat B tenants. The eligibility of Cat B tenants is set by the organizations before the assessment committees give the approval. Once everything is set, the organizations will process the applications accordingly. So each organization should be very clear about the criteria of Category B tenants that they themselves have set. About expediting the process is something that we aim to do, but still we have to strike a balance. We want to make sure that those who have been offered a unit are those with pressing housing need, because we're talking about public resources. So we have to be careful when it comes to streamlining of the procedure. But we do welcome operating organizations to talk to us about expediting the process. The unified platform also aims to shorten the pre-approval processing time. It will consolidate the different applications. Would there be a unified guideline, or is it for the organizations themselves? You're right. For Cat B tenants, we give organizations the flexibility to set the criteria. Are there any general guidelines? Because the organizations asked me. For permanent residents and non-permanent residents, is there a priority given to a certain group? Do you have guidelines? In general, we follow the practice of public housing application. Hong Kong residents can make applications. Well, I also have something to say about the guidelines, but I'll tell you later. We'll now hear from Lee Chung Kang. If members have questions, there can be a second round. I think transitional housing is rather awkward. It's just like the sandwich housing in the past. Now we have light public housing, so there is a different queue. For some projects of these transitional housing, there is Cat A and Cat B tenants. The ratio is adjusted from 80-20 to 60-40. The intention itself is good. But for Cat B tenants, they are those that with a pressing need for community support. How do you draw the line? How do you find out about their situation? I hope I can hear more from the administration. Some people are not even waiting for public housing, is that right? They want to live somewhere close to work, close to schools. I understand that the administration would like to make the best use of resources. They don't want to see these completed units go to waste. The intention of transitional housing is to help those who have been waiting for public housing. The aim is to provide a better living environment for them before they are allocated public housing. But for Cat B tenants that are not waiting for public housing, does it mean that they'll be staying in transitional housing forever because they're not public housing applicants? So at the end of the transitional housing project, what are they supposed to do? And what will you do with them? Where will they be housed? Now the line is waiting for public housing no less than 3 years. Will you lower the threshold so that people who are on the waiting list can be allocated transitional housing sooner? Will you lower it to, say, waiting for 1 or 2 years? This will be better for applicants, and this will also enhance occupancy rate. So these are my questions for the time being. Undersecretary. I thank Mr. Lee for his questions. Well, about the eligibility criteria for Cat B tenants. For someone who's not waiting for public housing, then we look at their asset and income. They have to be eligible for public housing before they can apply for transitional housing. That is one of the eligibility. Transitional housing is to help those with pressing housing needs or households with urgent need, say family that's divorced. One party has to leave the matrimonial home, where at the time of the application for public housing, they did not know that they were going to get divorced. And for some people, they might have exceeded the asset limit. We'll leave it to the operating organizations for them to make a decision. But for urgent cases, say a sudden change in situation, fire, or some other reasons, as a result, the family is in dire housing need, then they will be Category B tenants. The chance of them being given a unit is quite high. We want to give the flexibility to the organizations to help those in need. Sorry. I think the intention itself is good. Well, families who are going through divorce or parties suffering from domestic violence, or for youngsters or squatter housing who have just experienced a fire. But for the organizations, do they leave these units vacant? How can they break even? Will they earmark 10%, 20% of the units? You give them the units and for them to decide, or what? Can you elaborate? No, that is not the case. The ratio of 80 to 20 for Cat A to Cat B tenants. That means a maximum of 20% of the units can be allocated to Cat B tenants. 80% of the units will go to Cat A tenants. But now it's 60-40. Yes. The ratio is relaxed to 60-40. If Cat A does not reach 80%, then they can increase the number of units for Cat B tenants. So that means 60% of the units can go to Cat A tenants and 40% of those going to Cat B tenants. And as I said, that Cat B tenants are those that we have described. They can be allocated vacant units. Well, about the exit arrangements. We'll work with the operating organizations to provide assistance. We will help tenants go to other transitional housing projects. For Cat A, hope they will go to light public housing, or their cases will be referred to other organizations for support. In Nam Cheong 220, we have accumulated some experience. So for some projects, we will arrange for exit arrangements as soon as possible. For the Song Wong Toi project, there is a similar arrangement. We have started our work a year before, so it will be better. So where will the people go when the project ends? When the arrangement is made earlier, then there are units that have already been vacated because the household have been given public housing. We may leave these units vacant because there is only a very short period of tenancy. So in this way, we reduce the number in the project that have to be covered by the exit arrangements. And for some other cases, we provide assistance in different ways. Assistance is provided to them during their stay to enhance their capacity, the tenants' capacity. For some households, they may be able to find accommodation in the private market. So there are many different ways. So that means they have to go back to subdivided units. Not necessarily. Do you track their cases? Do you have the figures? Because these housing projects aim to help them. So is there a data bank tracking the information for Nam Cheong 220? We've compiled some data. Can you give us the information? About 25% of the Nam Cheong 220 project have been allocated public housing. Some others go to shared projects for transitional housing. Apart from giving them a roof over their head, we give them empowerment to enhance their capacity. There are matching projects. We help them save more. So for some people who are not allocated public housing, they group themselves together to rent a unit in the private market. We don't have an exact figure to track them as to whether they go back to subdivided units, but the majority of them go to adequate housing. I do hope that is the case. I don't want to see them going back to subdivided units. I think you need to track these cases. Well, it's my time. In principle, I welcome the unified platform, and it's something that the subcommittee has been fighting for. It is not just a platform. Apart from information, there are different functions. You talk about guided tours and adjustment of ratios. In principle, we agree with the direction you've taken. I hope that you will work the details out with these operating organizations. A number of them told me about detailed arrangements, but I'll leave them to you. I see that there is a regular meeting with operating organizations. I do hope that they are indeed regular meetings. You need to let them know that there is effective assistance provided. Well, back to what Mr. Low said about the timing of the platform. You said it's going to be the fourth quarter, and there will be 10,000 units in the pipeline this year. I do hope that the platform will be launched as soon as possible, hopefully the third quarter. We do hope that the 10,000 units will be put to the best use. Now I move on to the ratio. You say that now it's changed from 80 to 20. Well, I've been involved in subdivided unit issues for many years. For a lot of households, they are unable to apply for public housing, so they're not Cat A tenants. How do you define these households? Well, you talk about flexibility given to organizations, but please consider compiling guidelines. Well, whether it's transitional housing or rent subsidy, the aim is to meet housing need of the general public and the need to phase out subdivided units. How many of the households staying in SDUs have been rehoused to these projects? You need to set indicators, and perhaps you may consider setting a KPI. Say, well, for the 30,000 light public housing units, how many of them came from subdivided units? What more can you do to help those staying in subdivided units? You talk about guided tours and open day, and these ideas are good. But what about something regular? Something that's more targeted to SDU households. Things that will allay their concern, more chances for them to actually see the projects, to get a real feel, so that they will be more willing to move to transitional housing. We'll hold regular meetings with operating organizations to talk about details. Well, we'll talk to them about the operation of the platform. Regarding the ratio, Cat B tenants, those who are living in inadequate housing, say subdivided units, they represent an important group in the unit allocation. We'll compile statistics and data. With the launch of the platform, we'll be able to get a better understanding with more information and data available. At the same time, it will enhance transparency, so you'll know how effective these projects are. Thank you.
Thank you. I think what my colleagues said were very accurate, because before we have only information, this platform can be a start for not just dissemination of information. Of course, there will be more information. For example, like there will be like what Nam Chung 220 is doing and what you're going to do. So I hope you can do more in this regard. and this platform should be a start. I do understand that we have Dr. Hong who wishes to speak again, and I do have a question again. I want to ask about double benefits for transitional housing for those who have been waiting for public housing for 3 years. They can apply for apply for cash allowance. If they get admitted to public housing, they cannot obtain this cash allowance. But for those admitted to transitional housing projects, they can get cash allowance. It takes $11 billion to build transitional housing projects. Would those who benefited from those are getting double benefits in this regard? Would you also help those who are facing a dilemma in housing? There is a report on SDU tenants issued earlier. 37% of the SDU tenants have a monthly income of over $20,000, and many of them are of tertiary education level or above. So many of those have a decent income, but they have to live in SDUs. Would Cat B tenants include these people? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Wendy Hong. For Cat A tenants, when they are allocated transitional housing, they can obtain cash allowance under the cash allowance trial scheme. This does not constitute double benefits. The reason is that for transitional housing projects, operators would require rent to be paid to break even to operate such projects, to cover the construction cost. As you may know, operating organizations not only operate the housing units themselves, they would also provide services for residents. So they need to cover these costs as well. The government does not subsidize such operation costs. As for light public housing, it is different. For light public housing tenants, they cannot obtain the cash allowance under the cash allowance trial scheme. That is because when operating light public housing, the government would provide a subsidy. So essentially, there would be a tender for operators of light public housing, but it is technically subsidized by the government. That's why there is a difference between light public housing and transitional housing. Even with this difference, though, for transitional housing tenants who can obtain cash allowance, if they use it to pay rent, the net rent, so to speak, is not that different from the amount of rent paid for light public housing. So there's no double benefits, because if there are double benefits, that rent should be lower, but that is not the case. As for those who have a decent income but are living in SDUs, will Cat B tenants include such people? Right now, we have to accommodate those with pressing housing needs for Cat B. With SDUs in Hong Kong, there are different types of SDUs. It is not necessarily poor living conditions for SDUs. Some of them may still comply with the relevant buildings requirements. Their conditions may not be that bad. Our policies do not cater to the needs of these people. They cater to SDU tenants who are living in undesirable conditions. Also, when assessing Cat B applicants, we will also assess their income and assets. So the target of the transitional housing projects do not include those with decent income. Thank you, Chair. I do want to ask more questions because I'm not getting my answers just yet. I've asked whether the requirement for Cat A tenants, whether the 3-year threshold can be relaxed. I want an answer to the question. Also, with those living in SDUs with undesirable conditions or even illegal alterations, would you work with other departments to deal with such illegal SDUs? Third, I also asked a question earlier relating how operating organizations can break even. You are saying that they can be flexible with their ratio, but even after adjustments, they may want to reserve units for those in need, those facing domestic violence or extenuating circumstances. So I do want to know what you'll do with them. I want you to do more questionnaires or surveys like the ones in Namchang to see whether they have moved to a decent place. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lee. For Cat B tenants, many of them have been waiting for public housing for less than 3 years. So right now, through the adjustment of the ratio between Cat A to Cat B tenants, we will cater to the needs of those who have been waiting for public housing for less than 3 years. As for whether there is going to be a further relaxation for Cat A tenants, for those with less than 3 years wait to be regarded as Cat A tenants, we do not see such need at the moment, but we do not exclude such possibility in future. We would consider the circumstances, but right now we're doing so through the adjustment of the ratio. As for the SDUs that do not comply with statutory requirements, we will step up enforcement to rid of such illegal SDUs. We will also issue improvement orders for such SDUs. Also, with the break-even situation of operating organizations, with the Cat A, Cat B ratio, both Cat A and Cat B tenants have to pay rent. The difference lies in eligibility. They would have to pay rent, and the level of rent depends on the type of unit. It's just that Cat A tenants can apply for the cash allowance under the cash allowance trial scheme. That's it. Again, we do appreciate the introduction of the platform. However, as a comprehensive housing policy, we hope the government can tackle the root cause of the problem and make sure those people who have moved out, you still have data on them. You do not ignore their needs so that people can live in places and live in a warm living environment. Also, I do want to give some sort of a conclusion. Again, I welcome the introduction of the platform. The next meeting would be our last. We have achieved quite a lot in the past year, we have talked about many issues. So in the last meeting, I do hope the Bureau can talk about other things, give some sort of concluding remarks instead of just talking about tenancy control. This subcommittee is about improving living conditions of grassroots tenants. So be it transitional housing, tenancy control, and SDUs, cash allowance, other ancillary facilities for public housing, they are all interconnected. So I hope that the Bureau can take a macro perspective when considering policies. You are just not doing work based on a Bureau or department's function. I hope that you can work together to help these tenants. Also, our final aim is to rid of these poor condition SDUs. I hope that in future we'll have measures to deal with such SDUs. We now have 50,000 units. We should be able to rid of some SDUs with very poor conditions, such as I would say, the tree-hole SDUs, those that are not suitable for a living with imminent fire danger, etc. I hope we can step up efforts to tackle these, to get rid of these. It was said that you have worked with buildings department before, and we've talked about it before. We hope that in future we can discuss with the buildings department to set up a schedule to get rid of these poor condition SDUs to tackle this problem. This transitional housing should act as a buffer for these tenants. Thank you, Chair. I think our goal is clear. Our common goal is to get rid of these poor condition SDUs. We have to utilize limited resources through focused policies. We have to tackle the problem. One, we have to expedite the construction of public housing because, after all, the most effective option is to have an adequate supply of public housing. Also, in the near future, there's still shortage with public rental housing. We have transitional housing and light public housing, which complement each other to alleviate such shortage. To provide short-term housing options for such SDU tenants. It would also be a chance for us to follow up and rid of SDUs that do not comply with the statutory requirements. That much is clear. In the next meeting, we would follow up on information collected after the enactment of the ordinance on tenancy control. We will analyze such statistics in the next meeting. We also believe that as there are more housing units to be provided in future, be it rent or the ecosystem in general, there should be changes. We will continue to monitor the situation and formulate appropriate measures to tackle SDUs.
We've had a very good discussion about this unified platform. The subcommittee supports this proposal. We hope that it will be launched as soon as possible. As members have said that you're expected to talk to organizations about details to address housing issues relating to grassroots. If there are no other business, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much.